Welcome to another edition of the Re-Interview. I'm Hiten Simtani, TRD's Associate Publisher. Today I'm joined by Ben He and Michael Yarne, who are the co-founders of Social Construct. It's a company that, in their words, wants to transform the construction site into an assembly line. Now, that's a pretty provocative statement to make, but we're going to talk about what that means and the implications for the real estate industry and real estate professionals. But you've just emerged out of dark mode. Let's just try to get a very quick sense, the elevator pitch of what your product is.
So we developed a technology platform that organizes multifamily construction into three different stages: the site, the shell, and the internals. And that approach and the technology we've built with hardware and software allows us to actually build on site much more efficiently, as if we were building like an assembly line process to build multifamily construction there.
Okay. And how is that the next iteration of modular housing then, or is it like taking that forward?
Thank you for offering us that to make that distinction, by the way.
Yeah, we do appreciate that a lot because we get that question, as you can imagine. Modular construction has a very interesting history, and one that we've invested a lot in as an industry, and there will be a place for that, but we think that the vast majority of the market is actually better served by using in situ techniques, right? Where that's actually been working for the last several hundred years. It's just that labor costs and inefficiencies haven't kept up with our expectations.
Okay, so your approach is much more focused on understanding individual sites, individual challenges in different sites, and then going from there. What other ways would you distinguish it from the conventional way of thinking about modular?
Yeah, so we're also not a one-stop shop. So we're an ecosystem approach.
Right.
We believe that general contractors, subcontractors, local developers know best about their local markets and their local environment. And we want to actually incorporate that into our framework and our platform. And so we don't actually turn out cars in a factory and expect that those boxes or cars will work everywhere. These are buildings. Buildings are naturally, inherently local to the environment, and that the local input must be respected. We want to respect the architect's ability to actually adapt the structure and the design for the demands of that local market.
We're more Legos, and prefab modular is Duplo. You know, the big block in San Francisco where Ben and I live. Literally, you could go 500 feet and have a completely different foundation be required. Why? Because there's a former wetland, right, that requires massive piles, literally 500 feet from where I live. And then there's a site 500 feet from where I live that's on bedrock. And so if you're standardizing, like we are, that would be insanity to suggest a standardized approach for site.
And you guys are starting in California, which has to be said is among the most contentious places anywhere in the world to build.
We made a tactical decision, or strategic as well, to self-develop our first several projects.
Okay.
There's so much learning when you first do something, as you know, that we thought it would be better to internalize a lot of that risk by self-developing. Now, to be clear, we have a customer. We have a private equity partner who is the actual JV LP partner. They bought 95% of the project. The site was already entitled when we bought it. So we just modified the entitlements. And two, if I can sing Oakland's praises. Oakland is a far easier and entitlement environment than San Francisco.
Right.
So for me, and Ben, I was smiling when you asked me this question because I feel like I've been training at high elevation, because all my projects were in San Francisco. Everything is a melodrama. San Francisco, pretty much every decision is discretionary, and every decision, including putting a hot tub in your backyard, can go to the planning commission. So you can have literally appeals with lawyers about hot tubs.
To make this work as a business and at scale, you're going to have to play in these dirtier markets, right? It's contributing to build at cost, at a more affordable cost, faster, and all of that. You're going to have to play in markets that are not that are quite different and quite messy when it comes to things like this, right?
This is where technology really makes a difference.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why I think people have difficulty and delays and cost overruns and have fear around development is that development is an uncertain thing because design changes and every decision they make is shrouded kind of in mystery, right? Like if we need to change the facade, the amount of time it takes to go get bids and to go do that work is actually very expensive and takes a long time. This is where a system like ours can actually accelerate that process so that changes and accommodations occur much faster. And so that the risk taking that that has been taken today is not as necessary when the system actually updates almost in real time.
Anyway, a lot of those changes happen in so many unpredictable parts of the construction process, right? Like city council may send you back on something small, then there may be community opposition to a certain other part of it. So you're going back to the software each time and making those tweaks in a way that's cheaper, you're saying?
Yeah. And let's say you could actually design a building in real time. I put a bedroom here, I put a bathroom here, and you didn't have to worry about where the MEPs went, where the structural engineering has to change. If you could calculate that in real time, right? Those adaptations are like editing a Google Doc together, right? They all work. We don't have to worry about how that's going to render in a different browser or how that's going to print out in a different printer. Like we don't have to worry about these days because technology has abstracted out that complexity by automating it behind the scenes.
When you have a design change, you end up with, it ripples through the entire mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineer team, the structural team. So it's not as simple as an architect saying, oh, I'm going to set back the fourth floor, to accommodate that neighbor's desire for no shadow. It has a massive ripple effect. And it's not just the time it takes for all of those designers to coordinate. It's the ability to generate reliable bid costs. And so our system, our platform is automating a huge amount of that.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, architects are often at the mercy of their developers who are at the mercy of the general contractor, who's at the mercy of the subcontractor. Yeah. And there's so many, I guess, fault points in that process.
Yeah, but it's really difficult to coordinate. Yeah.
What would you be, I mean, so you're telling eventually you're going to license this technology or you're going to partner? You're telling them that at each fault line or each hiccup in the process, we could just go back and code this out or sort of map it out on the software? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. And it can generate the drawings and the permit set and the CDs to a level of fidelity that it would take hundreds of hours of engineer time to do. And that can be generated as an output of actually updating the core design of the building. Like take a rough concept, update it, generates the output. Yeah, that simple.
As we grow and scale and we have more and more data from labor time, it won't just generate a transparent bill of materials. Like, I call it the IKEA shopping list. Oh, this is what this design needs. But it would also generate increasingly statistically significant labor estimates. So that's the assembly line part Ben is talking about. We're really, we're literally studying we're treating the carpenter like our user. We're looking at what makes life easy for the installer. And we're measuring every minute of time in a way that many folks, the carpenters are like, what? You actually want to talk to us? I mean, it's this radical act. It's almost like we're anthropologists.
Michael, isn't that a little naive, though, that we're assuming here that the contractor has the agency to determine how the job is done or what is used, whereas at least in the big cities, the power doesn't flow from the worker, right?
I'm talking about the actual laborer. If we have real-time data from the laborer, we can actually more effectively manage the subcontractor owner. See, one of the problems I ran into as a developer is the opacity of these bids, right? In fact, you probably know this, and I don't know what it's like in New York, but in San Francisco, it's gotten so bad that the electrical or the plumbing subcontractor will just say, it's $40,000 a unit. You're like, how much of that is wiring? $40,000 a unit.
When I approach this problem, I'm looking at it and going, okay, how would we solve this if this had to be a manufacturing assembly line scalable process? And it's the reason that you have means and methods that do not work on the site is because no one has actually tested that means of methods for that specific space or that design or that unique environment. And so we go in and say, okay, let's eliminate 99% of the variation that has zero value. What would that system look like? Can we make a riser that goes straight up and down in a stud bay, right? 16-inch OC. Great.
I don't want to make out subcontractor owners as evil or something. I'm not. but they do like to make money.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that you see in their bids is they're pricing in all of the arbitrary unknowns. The part of the reason they pad their bids so much, right, is well, one is broken labor markets. We can get into that in a minute. Absolutely. These are like cartel-like labor markets. But one of the other more legitimate reasons, absolutely, is that they encounter such arbitrary job site conditions. There's so many, the tolerances they run into. This just doesn't fit the design drawings at all, right?
No.
So they build in extra budget specifically so they can avoid fighting over change orders, etc.
Okay.
And so what Ben is getting to is we're not just empowering the developer or the architect. We want to empower the subcontractor. They get to know our system. It's the same damn thing every time, if you will.
If we realize that there is power imbalances all over the place, but the inefficiencies are best solved if the system understands what the work is.
Okay. I think that's a fascinating point. Have you both considered the politics of this, right? Real estate, construction unions, particularly in every major city, are among the most politically connected and powerful entities. I mean, you could just look at the way that, you can follow the timeline from when a union says something to when the governor of New York says something. Same thing kind of happens in California. There's a lot of clout involved. There's a lot of incentive to keep things as they are. So can we talk a little bit about how you guys are going to withstand some of the fire that would come your way?
I think it's safe to tell you right out of the gate, we have a phenomenally close relationship with the Northern California carpenters. They are, the carpenters are the largest of the building trades unions. They have the largest membership, and they have the fastest growing membership. Mm-hmm. And by some amazing cosmic occurrence, they are very innovative and recognize that their industry needs to change. So the best answer to your question is, we have chosen an extraordinary partner in the Northern California carpenters. We are also at this stage working in Northern California. We're committed to using union carpentry labor.
I saw something you said in the TechCrunch article, one of you did, where you said, okay, it's going to be overall more work because they'll have more projects, but that is assuming, and in California, this is the hard thing, right? To actually get a project to construction is a massive task, right? Which is why in California, you could buy something, get it entitled, and suddenly it's worth way more than it was as dirt, right? I think that doesn't exist in many states to the same extent. So you're assuming that volume will also go up with efficiency.
So yes, a lot of it has to do with the risk, right? If you're a developer and you assume that your construction methods are going to be the same as conventional, you have to worry about escalation, contingency. You have to worry about the delivery risk, market timing risk, all of that. So once you actually have a system that becomes much more reliable in your ability to deliver at the cost and schedule level, that risk can be capped, right? So if you cap the risk and say it will not go over this price, it will not go over this date, then you have a revolutionary approach to how you address the needs of the real estate market. You can worry about what does the market need, how much entitlement can I get through, and what is the process for delivering on what best programs are out there.
Yeah, I just want to also share some also somewhat humbling information. There is no right now in the Bay Area, there's no shortage of entitled projects.
Okay.
What there is the real estate economics are upside down. Before COVID, we were already in this place. It's now even worse, right? So hard costs have continued to escalate year over year at unsustainable levels, and rents had already softened, right?
Right.
And now, as you know, they're collapsing in the high cost cities. San Francisco, it's remarkable. The reason those escalations have been happening is not that glass, steel, and wood have been escalating 7% every year. It is 1,000% labor, and most importantly, markups on labor. It's an important point because people think when we're saying, oh, labor is outrageously expensive, that we're actually suggesting that wages are too high.
You're not trying to replace the bodega like that startup that came along. It was
No.
actually
I mean,
called a bodega for a while. I don't know what happened with that.
That was a lovely startup. So fun.
tech definitely has some insensitivity towards small businesses, and subcontractors are small businesses. And this is where, again, our approach differs. Like, we're trying to figure out, how do we help them increase their productivity?
Yeah.
How does technology and our ability to deliver technology in an accessible manner actually gives them more productivity so they can actually build more?
Got it. I wanted to, and you don't need to talk specifically about your competitors, but I will, and I'm sure you can. But you're really in that emerging field of construction tech, right? Which has seen a lot of money flow into it. I want to say not even maybe in the last 2 years at the most. There have been a couple of very serious setbacks in that field. I'm thinking about Sidewalk Labs, which is the most well-capitalized, most powerful alphabet company. They had a pretty major setback in Toronto where they were developing this mega city in Toronto and Queens Quay. So they've pulled the plug on that specific project. And then Katerra, which is the other massive one, SoftBank backed, raised a couple $2 billion, mass layoffs. Most projects haven't been completed. When you're faced with sort of elephants like that, no, elephant's not the right word, but big companies that have had these kind of failures, what does that do for the perception of your business?
So I used to be in the meme business.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay,
so like,
I
don't.
just for my viewers who are not aware, Ben was the CEO of I Can Has Cheeseburger, or the Cheeseburger Network, which is one of the, I guess, the pioneers of monetizing memes. Let's say it's the best way to put it.
Yeah. And we were at one point one of the largest media networks on the internet, and it's given me a very unique insight into honey badgers don't care. Right? There have been setbacks there throughout history of large, well-capitalized people or industries, and I don't take any joy in watching them, because it certainly does make the job harder. However, as a small, tiny little startup who's taken a very unique perspective and a unique approach, we can point to them and say, that's not what we're doing. We're not trying to manufacture giant cities from scratch. We're doing one little building now. And what we're trying to do is prove that it works at this small scale, because we know that technology is really good at scaling stuff. And we're going to apply scale after we figure out the technology.
Real estate focused startups have tapped the real estate industry for funds. Are you looking at the industry as well for money? Like, would you be open to that and have that expertise?
At this point, we've proven our system to a point where it's no longer a weird thing being done by a stranger from the outside industry. Now we can point to a building, take them on a tour, show them our technology, show them our progress, and say, hey, we are believable. You can trust us to actually scale this to the next level. And that's where I think the strategic partnerships with real estate come in. And so, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I do want to say, I'm thrilled that we went with more traditional VC, tech VC, because I worry that we've done some pretty audacious things that I think the real estate sector might not fully understand. One thing I would have worried about is if we raised money from the real estate sector initially, they might want us to look and quack more like a duck. And we don't. And actually Katerra and FactoryOS to me are examples that they're a little traditional in the sense that Katerra is the GC, right? So I just think that we're a little different.
If you take money too early from within the industry, I think you end up having to cater to existing expectations about what the future looked like. And so we took money from investors who have vastly different visions of what the future can be.
And they because it's not their pond, they don't teach you how to swim in the same way, right?
Yeah, they don't get worried when you quack, or when you squeal, or when you fly, right? Like, they're like, well, should he be doing that? I don't know. Like,
there's your background coming in. You're never going to escape it. Construction financing typically works in tranches and construction milestones. So let's say you get a loan from all this. I'm just setting it up. But let's say you get a $200 million loan on a big project. You'll get the first chunk of it when you hit a certain milestone, another chunk of it when you hit another milestone. The funds are released in a specific way that is tied to construction milestones. Your your model is going to change that a little bit, right?
That's a great question, and there's a couple answers. First of all, we chose a beautifully traditional construction lender for our first project, First Republic, privately owned bank. Small is beautiful. All right, I will just keep saying that over and over. That's the E.F. Schumacher quote. But by doing a small project, this lender was realized, okay, this is manageable. I know it's the first time they're using this system. So, and by the way, our construction loan process has gone super smoothly. They look at it as just, surprisingly, the construction lender has looked at it like any other construction project. They recognized it was new, and perhaps they might have not given us as high a loan to cost as a more conventional project would have gotten. But the good thing about the construction lending industry, they're kind of like herd cattle, right? If one cow is going to the water, then they'll all go to the water because they're like, oh, look, they delivered. They actually met their schedule.
But your milestones are different, right? Your timelines are different. Your milestones are different.
Actually, they're not. So this is again, this is where like we're meowing like a duck, right? It's like really bizarre because of our approach, right? Because we're not this prefab modular system that shows up at a factory and like you gotta pay all the people in advance. We appear very much like a conventional project. You show up to the site, it looks kind of like mostly like a conventional project, just better organized with faster installation. And so the risks and the timelines and the draws actually are very similar to conventional. And this is actually by design. We recognize the difficulty of a real estate developer having to work with banks to convince them this is new technology is going to work. How do you do that?
Yeah, because so much of what is built is what can be financed, and that's been the tragedy of development in big cities, right, for a long time.
And this is where like we understand the pressures and the risks associated with financing. We understand the banking side. I mean, like having gone through venture and understanding just how much risk they're willing to take and what the returns have to be, and looking at real estate, I have a much broader perspective now, and that is if you can reduce the risk, if you can underwrite the guarantee, then the economics start to work out because the banks care about risk because their returns are guaranteed. Once you control for the risk, financing becomes easier. So if the bank knows that the technology and the savings or our guarantee and our cost and schedule makes their risk less, they're willing to loan to the developer. Like we're trying to figure out how do you actually get technology to create more conventional banking for the developer and make it easier.
Yes, but there's also, I mean, this is part of the challenge of being an entrepreneur is, right? If you're pioneering a new technology, any hiccup or any snafu that goes public can be like, how many people die on the road every day? People are still driving. One death in the self-driving car experiment, and it was pretty much halted for 6 months. They had to kind of, right? So you're in that, and you are building homes. There is a very emotional component to it as well.
So our risks are very different than the self-driving car. Structurally using conventional shell structure methods prevent kind of that high risk approach, like seismically, fire rating, safety, like those are actually very well understood and covered. And that's actually one of the benefits of having a very conservative construction industry.
There's an idea, people fetishize technology, and sometimes there's a desire to use high-tech things just because they're high-tech. And I think Ben and I have really pushed a discipline. The only time we're going to do something out of the box is if we can show that it's generating labor savings and efficiency on the site. And usually that doesn't mean some fancy material or some crazy thing. You enter our job site, you'd notice it's basically a lot of wood and drywall and conventional parts that are put together differently.
Is there a risk in your approach that you're creating the next, like, is it going to lend itself to cookie cutter development, or maybe the opposite? Like,
yeah, so that's where we and Modular vastly differ, because with our software, if you look at the TechCrunch article, you'll notice that the top-down view of the footprint is like there's a square corner, 90-degree, and then nothing else is almost 90. Like everything else is weird, little triangles and things like that. And that's because our system can accommodate variations in design.
Okay.
There are definitely costs associated with weird angles and things like that, but we actually want to provide that as a feedback loop to the architect and the developer and say, is it worth it to you?
Yep.
You want to have this feature, because now you can actually calculate the cost of it almost in real time.
We're not saying to a developer, oh, you can't do a jaggedy angled thing. if you love bay windows, if that's your thing, but what our system provides the developer is a real data-driven approach to make that trade-off. That developer gets to decide, is that bay window worth the extra $2 a gross square foot?
How is your company designed, or how are you thinking about training? Because this is going to require quite a big change in how and people in construction tend to be almost generational too, right? Their families have been in construction and whatnot. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've certainly gotten the question of why are you asking us to do it this way, right? We have a facility in San Francisco where we actually had a mock-up of like a one-story structure, and that's where I actually do our training. And what happens is people come in and say, okay, all right, this is easier, but like I can reduce the part count, or I can make this better if I do it this way. And we tell them, hey, the reason we do it this way is because it standardizes the rest of the building. I know that we don't need a 3-inch, cast iron pipe for DWV up on the 4th floor where it's at the top and there's nothing coming from the top. Like I totally get that, but that's a standard size for us, and we mass manufacture those, and that mass manufactured part is how we give you the productivity you need.
You're taking the romance out of construction, Ben. Come on.
That's not the kind of romance I want.